Good afternoon. My name is Ala McCoy. I'm Director of Startup Support at the University of Maryland's UM Ventures. And I'm very happy to welcome you to today's workshop. Today's workshop is on a very important topic, understanding conflict of interest at the University of Maryland. And it's led by the chair of the Conflict of Interest Committee, Professor Pat O'Shea. He is a professor at ECE department at the University of Maryland, and as I said, he is also a chair of the COI committee at the University of Maryland. Felicia Metz, associate director of UM Ventures, is a member of COI committee as well, and Dr. Beth Britton Powell, director of research compliance initiatives at the University of Maryland, and also a member of the COI committee. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my mic and camera. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and sharing the information. This is going to be a 1.5 hour session. We allotted a lot of time for a lot of information, and hopefully there will be lots of questions from the audience. Please don't be shy. Go ahead and submit your questions as they pop into your head. So thank you so much to our panelists for spending time with us, and why don't we go ahead with the session.
Thank you so much, Ala. I'm Pat O'Shea, chair of the Research Conflict of Interest Committee, and I'm delighted to be joined by Felicia and Beth, who will co-present with me today. We hope we have a good interactive session, so we encourage lots of questions and discussions. So, our role in the Conflict of Interest Committee is to help you manage your external activities and to stay in compliance with university, state, and federal regulations. So we're here to help and help you manage any conflicts of interest that might arise. So we're going to talk to you broadly about three things. The first is the Maryland public ethics law, which is sort of the governing law in the state of Maryland, which governs our policies here. The next item is a little bit about the process of filing a disclosure on our new system. And finally, then we're going to talk about some case studies and have some interactions with you to discuss the particular of things that may arise and may result in conflict of interest. But it's important that having a conflict of interest is not necessarily a problem. It's only a problem if it's undisclosed and if it's unmanaged. That's where the problems arise. So the key thing in all of this is to file a disclosure and then have a discussion with the committee on how, if there is a conflict, how it might be managed. So just want to talk briefly about some definitions and the distinction between conflict of interest, which is COI, and the conflict of commitment, because our policy is called conflict of interest and conflict of commitment policy. So the first bullet point here is that these policies apply to all university employees, to faculty and to staff and to all of our administrators as well. So the concept of conflict of interest typically involves potential financial gain or personal benefit to an employee or relatives through some outside activity. Conflict of commitment is different in that one could have an outside activity which didn't involve a conflict of interest, but the nature of the activity might impact one's ability to do one's job. So like having a second job which involved working for many, many hours a week, even if it didn't involve a conflict of interest, could be a conflict of commitment and could impact one's ability to do one's work. So basically, we are, as University of Maryland employees, also state employees. And that's really important to remember here because the Maryland state ethics law applies to all of us. So I want to talk a little bit about the provisions of the Maryland Public Ethics Law, or MPEL as it's called, and just summarize how it applies to us. And as I said, it applies to all state personnel, including all faculty and staff. And it was basically enacted to ensure that we are impartial and use independent judgments as steward of public resources, and that we avoid improper influence or even the appearance of improper influence. So, the possibility that a conflict of interest could exist is enough to trigger a disclosure and have a discussion, okay? So, because of the nature of the work we do at the university related to research, there is a specific carve out from the general Maryland public ethics law that allows us to do things which we wouldn't do if we were regular state employees. And so that allows our policies basically to take the place of the Maryland public ethics law for research-related conflict of interest. Conflict of commitment, that is, if one has, let's say, an outside job which maybe impact one's ability to get work done, that's typically dealt with at the unit level, institute, department, or college, wherever one is working, okay? So the specific stand of the carve-out for research-related conflict of interest is that we as employees may work with companies on R&Ds in ways that are prohibited for all other state personnel, and it allows our conflict of commitment and conflict of interest policies and procedures, which you can find on our website, to take the place of the Maryland public ethics law for research and development related conflicts of interest. So if there is a conflict of interest, management plans must be put in place, and part of what we do in the committee is help you do that. And again, I should emphasize that the university has authority only to manage research related conflict of interest. If there's some other type of conflict of interest that's not research related, then the State Ethics Committee retains authority over that, and there's a special form required for applying for special permission related to non-research related conflict of interest and exemptions, okay? So some examples of the provisions in the Maryland State Ethics Law. So it says basically that a university employee may not participate in an official action, decision, or matter in circumstances where the employee are close relatives, and close relatives are defined on our website, where they have some outside financial interest. Okay, so if there's an outside financial interest and you're making decisions on the university side in relation to that, that's not allowed. And also, you're not allowed to hold secondary employment or financial interest that would impair your impartiality or independence of judgment. And you're not allowed to engage in activities that misuse our students or other employees for the benefit of outside entities. And also to solicit personal gifts for yourself or others from individuals who are seeking to do business or are doing business with the university. Okay, so I'm going to give you a brief summary of the sort of roles and responsibilities of everybody here, and a little bit about how the process works. So as a faculty member or employee in general, the first step is to disclose if you feel there is potential conflict of interest. That is honest and complete disclosure of relevant information related to a potential COI. And then we have this new system in place since last November. There is a plan to merge this with the OPA outside professional activities for next year. But remember, filing an OPA does not mean you comply with the conflict of interest regulations, but we hope to have that all sorted out by next year. So after you've disclosed, it gets passed on to chair, director, and then the dean. Their job is to have situational awareness, see if the conflict of interest can be eliminated. If not, the ask is the activity necessary or important. And is a reasonable COI management plan possible? And there are examples on our website of various management plans. Then after the administrators had a look, it comes up to the COI committee, where we engaged in advanced triage and basically work with the employee to develop COI management plans, if that's possible, and to ensure that these are complying with the regulations. But ultimately, it's the president who approves, or maybe not, proposed COI management plan. So if there's no COI, obviously there's no management plan. If there is a COI, the committee will make a recommendation with a reasonable management plan to the university, and the president then is the final decider as to whether the activity will be allowed and can be managed. Okay, so that's a basic summary. I'm not going to say a lot about federal regulations. They are agency specific, and there are specific reporting requirements for each federal agency that go beyond the internal reporting here at the university. So, and it behooves any PI, co-PI who's submitting a grant to check the ORA website, check the solicitations, and check the requirements for each federal regulation. And we expect that the federal regulations are somewhat of a moving target. The state regulations have been very stable. So I'm not going to make any further comments right now on federal regulations. So I'm going to pass it over now to Beth, who is going to talk a little bit about the disclosure process. But before that, are there any questions that anybody has about the first part of the presentation?
Something to stress too for what Pat was talking about, that disclosure, again, it's not a bad thing. It's not admitting any sort of guilt or problem on something. In my mind, it's kind of a good thing to have a conflict. It shows that often, that you're entrepreneurial minded, working to further develop and get your university research developed and out into the real world for public use and public benefit. So disclosure is a good thing. Having a managed COI is a good thing. And keep in mind too, that we have this policy. It's the failure to follow policy, failure to have a managed COI, then that would implicate problems with or violations of state ethics law. So as long as you're following policy, things are good for you. So just did want to stress that. This presentation too, we're focused on individual conflicts of interest in research. What we're not going to talk about today are institutional conflicts, if you've heard that term mentioned, or organizational conflicts. So this is really focused on individual conflicts of interest that you might have as a researcher.
Thanks, Felicia. The other thing that I think we should stress is that the reminder that when you disclose to the university or you disclose to the federal agency, they're not the same thing. So when you disclose to the COI committee, we don't send that information to the federal agency as your disclosure. If the federal agency requires a disclosure, you have to do it with them. There is a crosstalk in that manner. If you have a managed plan, some of the agencies do require that we send the managed plan, but that's very different. We're not actually sending your disclosure. We're sending how we're mitigating the potential conflict. Right. So I'm Beth. So I took over as the COI administrator in January when Pat came on as chair. We have tried to simplify a lot of processes, and that was when Joe Smith and Phil DeShong were also in these positions. So this last year, we've really been looking at how do we disclose at the University of Maryland? How can we make it easier? And so that's sort of what I'm going to talk about in this next section, is how we've made some changes. So as we've already talked about, disclosing, that's the most important thing that you can do. Be open, honest in your disclosure, give us more information potentially than you think we might need. If you're in doubt as to whether you should disclose it, you should probably disclose it. A lot of what we see can be handled administratively. But disclosing also, if you just disclose and you answer no to all the questions, then you get an auto approve for your disclosure. So you can state that you made a disclosure to the University of Maryland. It was found to be not a COI. And even if you disclose and some of the things aren't COIs, you may have a management plan for a smaller piece of what you disclosed. So there are many ways in which you can create a disclosure. In the past, it was a paper disclosure. And so we'll talk a little bit about how that has changed. But you're either having conversations with your chair or dean or colleagues, and someone makes a suggestion that you should disclose, or you've talked to Pat as the chair of the COI committee, or you have emailed COI at UMD and someone has suggested you disclose. That's one entrance into this disclosure process. Or you've talked to UM Ventures, or you've talked to ALA. There's a lot of people that will point you in the direction of disclosing. But the other way that it happens is you're triggered when you submit a proposal through Aura. So when you are submitting proposals to Aura, there's a routing form. And on that routing form, there are 2 questions that could trigger you to think, oh, I need to create a disclosure. One is the question that you have to check, do I have a real or potential conflict related to this work? So within this proposal, do you have a potential conflict? Are you suggesting in your proposal as an STTR that you're going to work with your company? That's a potential conflict of interest that should be disclosed. Are you going to be doing a consultancy with a company? Those kinds of things. That might be one way that you answer this question. If you're working with your significant other on the project, that is a disclosure that should be made. So that box should be checked. Or if you are submitting a proposal to HHS. So they require, PHS requires a financial conflict of interest disclosure at the time of proposal. So again, you would be triggered at that point to go ahead and disclose.
Sorry to interrupt, but there was a question about consulting, which we'll get into some case studies about when consulting might trigger a COI. Could you maybe comment on, yes, when you're triggered, if you're submitting a proposal, if you're not submitting a proposal, but consulting?
If you're not, so what we would suggest is if you have a discussion where it looks like you're being asked to consult with someone, that you talk with your chair first. Their chairs are the ones that give the approval because it's a potential conflict of commitment. But then you probably should contact Dr. O'Shea or myself and ask about disclosing. I would say 99.9% of the time, well, actually probably 100% of the time, Pat and I are going to suggest that yes, you do disclose your consultancy. Again, disclosure is not saying that you have a conflict. Disclosing is saying I have an outside activity and you want it reviewed. So the committee may look at it, or Pat and I may look at it as the administrators and make a decision that no, you're not, this falls in line with what we expect to see from researchers at the University of Maryland, particularly faculty at the University of Maryland, and that it's not a conflict. But again, then you get a memo and you get a no COI disclosure disposition. So you've submitted to the committee or to the COI office, and we've told you, in our opinion, it is not a conflict of interest. So again, these are good things to have because again, you have that letter. So when we used to do disclosures, again, they were paper. We have tried to simplify things for you because it wasn't just paper for the conflict of interest, it was also using IRBnet. If some of you have used IRBnet before and you don't use animals and you don't use human subjects and you only used it to disclose financial conflicts of interest, you can breathe a sigh of relief. You do not have to use IRBnet any longer. It's a very good system in a lot of ways, but when you don't use it a lot, it can be very confusing. What we've done is we've again tried to simplify the disclosure process by taking 2 different things, a paper system and IRBnet, and adding it together. So we've gone through all the questions, and that is what formed KCOI. So quality research is how we do proposals, do our financials. They also had a module for conflict of interest. So a lot of times you'll hear us call it KCOI. In that, it is a living document. And so the living document means you fill it out. If you have updates after you have a disposition, after we either say you do have a conflict or you don't have a conflict, within 30 days of any change in what you've disclosed to us, then you should update. If you don't have any updates, and you update it annually. So this is like you've done before, either as paper or an electronic system, but again, now it's combined into one thing. The other thing that Pat mentioned is We are trying to, again, reduce the number of systems where you're entering information that may contain conflict of interest information. And that's the outside professional activities report. What we're trying to do in this next year is we have a working group looking at whether we can combine that into KCUI. So hopefully by the spring, you would have one system in which you're putting all this information in, and many people would have access to the information to look at reports and to make sure that we are covering any potential conflicts of interest. So if you haven't been in KCUI yet, we just wanted to give you some ideas of what the screens look like. So when you go to KCUI, the first screen that you may get looks like this, and you're going to click on conflict of interest. What conflict of interest does is, first thing, it's going to ask you what university you're with. So which campus are you with? Many of the campuses within USM are starting to use KCUI, so you would check College Park. And are you a researcher? So our definition is, are you a PI, co-investigator, key personnel on any sponsored research program? If you say yes or no to that, it creates the KCUI is a progressive display. So based on your answers, you see additional questions. So you're not looking at the entire form when some of the questions may or may not apply to your situation. You also get an indication of how much more of the form you need to fill out. So we ask you questions. Most of them are yes or no questions. Have you received a gift? Have you received compensation in the last 12 months? Do you have travel? Are you consulting for someone? Are you on a board of directors? So you would answer yes or no to a series of questions that ask you what seem to be conflict of commitment questions, but are also related to conflict of interest. And then you have a list of different items, which you cannot read because I made it too small. But basically it's asking questions such as, I teach academic or professional courses for another university. I provide consultation work. Or you could say none. So you just check these boxes. Whenever you answer yes to a question, or you check one of these boxes, you're prompted to add more information. And you do that through what's called an outside entity. So basically you add a line, you add information about whether so for example, I serve on a board of governors for a school. I would add that entity name in. It would prompt me with certain questions, and I would answer those questions within it. I describe what I'm doing, whether I'm paid or not paid. I give a range if I'm paid. Or if you're doing consulting work, you would add consulting. We have a lot of FAQs on our page on COI's website that give you how to answer some of these questions. And honestly, if you are ever stuck, you can save your data and you can contact COI at umd.edu, say, I'm stuck. I have access to your disclosure, so we can walk through and do a Zoom, help you answer questions if you're stuck on how to answer something.
Beth, there's a question in the chat about the equity interest question and what to report. Like if you have an index fund or mutual fund, is that a sort of thing that has to be reported? Is there a FAQ on that? Or
I believe there is, but if you do not have control over how the funds are invested, then you do not have to include it. It's more if you have stock in a company that the university does business with, you might want to include it. But so if you have, I have my 401k, I have stocks in that. I have no control of how they're invested. I do not disclose that information because I have no information to provide for it. So please let me know if that answered that question. I'll try to make sure that if we don't have an FAQ on that, we add one. So one of the other things that we do once you have disclosed is we try to determine whether there is a real or perceived conflict of interest. The main thing that our job is to ensure the integrity of research, just like every person on campus. It is about integrity in research. So this process is about that as well. And what we want to do is to either eliminate any potential conflict. So if you have equity or you have a consultancy, if we can't manage it, we may ask you to step down. So for example, if you have a consultancy with a company, but then you're going to have a proposal where you're in a prime sub relationship with that company, you can't do both. So we would help you to eliminate that bias by saying during the time of the award, you need to step down from the consultancy. We can also try to reduce the incentive bias by restricting equity. I can say that word, or we can manage the consequences by having a monitoring plan or a management plan. There are some conflicts that can't be entirely avoided. And so they often, though, can be resolved or mitigated. In the 10 years that I've served on the Conflict of Interest Committee, I would say there are only a handful of conflicts and disclosures that have come our way where we found them to be unmanageable, and we've tried to work with them. Our job as the Conflict of Interest Committee, though, is to try to work with you. Our job is to help you do your research. And so I'm going to turn it over to Felicia, but are there any questions? Let's see, one just came up.
There was an earlier comment in the chat about the differences between OPA and disclosing COI and unclear messaging or understanding.
So OPA, one of the concerns with OPA is it's only open for a short period of time. What the working group is looking at is if it is enveloped into KCOI, then you would have the opportunity to add outside activities at any point in the year. We think that this will help. It will also reduce the number of times you have to add an activity, or the potential for adding the activity in OPA one way, but a different way of disclosing it in KCOI. So our hope is that by combining the systems, we're actually reducing redundancy, and we're reducing the amount of time that you spend adding these activities. And so, okay.
There's another question. What courses of action are available for subordinates regarding transparency and understanding UMD's management mitigation of real or perceived conflicts created by the superior's relationship with third parties?
Sure. So once a perceived or real conflict is disclosed, and in the committee's recommendation is that there's a management plan. What we have started to do in the last 6 to 9 months is have intake meetings. So where we have discussions with the investigator or the researcher that's involved, with the administrators in that department and the chair of that department, and just to make sure everyone's on the same page. The other thing that we do is outreach to that lab, that researcher's personnel. So, and that is done with the oversight official, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and Dr. O'Shea or myself coming in and talking to the lab without the reporter, the person with the conflict, potential conflict, being there. So we have an open discussion about what the conflict is, what conflicts are in general, and who they can come and talk to. So it is giving them the resources so that they understand what their role is, who they can come to if they have questions and things like that. So.
And if anybody has unresolved concerns, one can always reach out to us at coi@umd.edu.
Right.
Yep.
Felicia, so
there's one more question about related to disclosing stock information. How do we know whether the university has any business with the company we've invested in?
Sure.
You know, if it's stock you have control over, I'd err on the side of reporting, right?
Exactly. There are a lot of times we get information that someone works with the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts. The fact that I serve on a board of governors with my son's school is probably not something I have to disclose. It doesn't relate to what I do at the university, but I chose to disclose that just to be on the safe side. So again, it goes back to when in doubt, go ahead and disclose. If you aren't sure that's the route you want to take as your first step, you can always contact us at coi@umd.edu, and we're happy to discuss any issues or concerns that you have.
There's another question. If a PI has equity interest in a company, the PI cannot accept sponsored research, right? I think as a blanket statement, not necessarily. I think it depends on the scenario, how the sponsored research is being set up, and maybe this question will be better answered as we get into some of the scenarios next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I agree with Felicia said, and we also try to work with you. So it isn't, our first answer is never no. Our first answer is how can we, and that's why we have committee meetings for these discussions. But as Felicia said, she's going to go through some case studies, which will probably help to illuminate some of this.
Okay, so interactions with companies. Examples of potential conflicts of interest might arise in situations where you as a university PI, one of your family members, another researcher you might collaborate with, or any other university employee holds equity ownership in a company, even if it's worth nothing. If you have a board position with a company, even if it's unpaid. If you're an employee of, an officer of, director of, or consultant to the company, even if unpaid. I know there's a lot of consulting relationships these days too that are really employment. Employment and consulting mean something different. And just so you're aware too, the university is working on an updated policy on consulting, which hopefully will help eliminate many of the gray areas and also address some newer federal guidelines and regulations. Other interaction that you have some sort of contractual or financial relationship with the company, and just straight consulting with a company. All of these sorts of interactions could trigger a COI, actual or perceived. So an example of consulting. Professor Proton has disclosed that he has a consulting relationship with a company called Imperial Widget Corporation. Professor Proton wants to be the university PI on a subaward that it's getting from Imperial Widget Corporation. This creates a conflict. How we would suggest mitigating. Professor Proton must either stop or cancel any formal consulting agreements with Imperial Widget during the period of performance of that subaward with the university.
So we have a question as to whether COIs only relate to our involvement with companies, or does it also include our involvement with local charitable foundations?
I think it could include involvement with foundations as well, especially where those same foundations might be sponsoring research.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit later, specifically.
There's another consulting question. So if I start a consultancy company of my own, could you list actions I need to take to disclose it once a company is registered? So basically you would go to KCOI and you would disclose, you would just fill out the disclosure that includes the information that's provided for your company.
And where a conflict then might be triggered is if what you do for your consulting is very closely related to what you do as your university research.
If there is no relationship between your consulting and the university at the time, you simply have a company that does something similar, but you have separated those things, then we may consider that there isn't a conflict at this time, but we would provide you some information for ensuring that a conflict didn't arise. For example, that your students can't work at your company. So anyone in your lab cannot be employed by your company. Students in your classes cannot be employed by your company. Things like that. So we would give you advice on things that may come up, but that aren't present at the time.
See, there's another question. I've discussed all of my external consulting with my department chair in the past and listed it on the OPA. However, I've not disclosed via KCOI because I didn't know about it. Should I go in and report these activities now?
Again, I would err on the side of caution and I would go into KCOI and go ahead and report those activities. Again, it's a living document. So once you've done that, You don't have to add them again. So starting that disclosure, and we should say, if this working group goes forward and OPA gets incorporated into KCOI, we're all going to be doing this annually anyway. So you would just be getting a jump on it by adding your information early.
And consulting, right, triggers conflict of commitment concerns that you would deal with through your unit for time spent. Keep in mind too, currently there's not a hard rule on number of hours you can consult in a week. I think there's kind of an understanding of what that might be, but the working group that's coming up with the policies will help provide clearer guidelines on that. The case study here, this is, I think, probably the clearest example where consulting would trigger a conflict of interest in that the same company you consult for is also then going to sponsor research. And so by putting up a wall where you pick one over the other during the period of a particular research project, that's our recommendation for how to mitigate that conflict. Next slide. Outside employment, I think a lot of similarities to consulting, but full employment, I think is something a little bit different. And there are more challenges with having dual employment concurrently with your university position. So you could have various types of outside employment. Let's say your university research, you focus on investigating battery technology. You could have outside employment, say you have a part-time job as a barista in a coffee shop. Another sort of outside employment, say you work 15 hours a week at Acme company as an employee of that company investigating cathodes. Any policies implicated here? Hopefully with both examples, yes, our conflict of commitment and conflict of interest policies are both implicated here. The outside job as a barista in a coffee shop, as far as research conflicts of interest, there probably is none, but what is implicated is the conflicts of commitment policy and making sure you have time to do these other activities. The second one, I think, is more problematic and implicates conflict of interest policies in that there could be very close overlap with your employment for this outside company as with your university position. Also consider taking leave from the university, the leave without pay process through the provost's office. That's one way of better separating work when you do have or are interested in having dual employment, because I think it's pretty hard to manage not just conflicts, but also IP rights and other things with outside employment. Other problems that might arise when you have outside employment is, say, wanting your students to come work at the same company you work at. And one point that the committee is very concerned about is protection of students and their interests.
And postdocs too, another person
Right.
under your control.
Anybody who reports to you. Let's see. Creating a startup company, which my office deals a lot with, which the university certainly encourages, but can create and bring rise to conflicts of interest in your research. You might want to create a company to research and develop widgets and associated software for using those widgets. You might need to license IP from the university that you've done at the university, or you might want to create this company to develop technology outside of what you do at the university. Either way, creating a company could give rise to conflicts of interest in research and should be appropriately disclosed. But pros and cons for starting a company. that you might think, well, it's not worth it. It creates a lot of messes. I have more paperwork to do. But keep in mind, this is allowable. Having a company, the university has an interest in getting its research and products of research developed. And often the best way to do that is to create a company where you know the technology best to help further develop it, get it in a position where it could be commercialized, another company could pick it up. Companies have access to different funding sources than you might have at the university, where might be more focused on basic research. So a lot of benefits, positives to starting a company. And of course, it's allowable as long as you're following policies.
We have a question about startups. If a PI has a startup, the question is they're confirming that the postdoc or their students cannot work at the company, and that's correct. People in your lab cannot work at your company. That is an unmanageable conflict of interest.
And why it's unmanageable, if you have control over your student graduating, their grades, moving on in their education, and let's say you also have them working at your company, which I agree could be a great real world experience for them. We want our students to have these experiential learning opportunities. But say they do something at your company that you're not happy with, we want to avoid that happening where then you punish them on the university side, where perhaps what they're doing isn't in line with what you want them to do on the company side. And that's very hard to manage. And so to protect our students, we do draw a line in having current students you advise, current students in your classes working for your company. When they graduate, that's a different story though. Next slide. And so where having a company and working at the university can create some problems, and you might hear this term about fiduciary duty. So the university policies and state law have provisions which do allow university employees to be officers and directors in outside companies, as long as you're following policies, of course. But where this can cause problems and conflict is that you owe certain fiduciary duties to your company. What's a fiduciary duty? Generally, when you hear that term, we're talking about duty of loyalty and duty of care. Duty of loyalty means that you set aside your personal interests and the university's interests, and you're making decisions on the basis of the company's best interests. And what that is, a company exists to make money for its shareholders. And so decisions that you make for the company have to align with that. And so competing with the company would not be in line with that duty of loyalty. Duty of care is, I think that's the next line, Beth, that you must be fully informed, active participant in the company and make good faith decisions. And so exercising good business judgment in the operation of the business. So if you have certain knowledge on, say, what's happening with research or intellectual property that the company has an interest in, and you're also on the company side, that can create some problems. Wearing multiple hats, often, I think, a lot of researchers on campus, you're focused on what your research is and developing a technology, whether it's developed at the university, at a company. In many people's minds, it doesn't matter. It's all about the technology. But what we're trying to get across is that companies and the universities' interests may not always be aligned. And if you wear two hats, deciding today or this hour, or this minute, which hat you have on is often something that can't be separated. So how then do you manage competing duties, especially conflicts in research, where there is a potential for biased research results? And that's really sort of kind of an open think about it question. When you have these two separate interests, you have duties to the company, you have duties to the university. Which hat are you wearing? That can be very challenging. to manage. Next slide. Remember your duties to the university as a university employee, personnel. It's a different standard, different fiduciary duty standard than as if you're a corporate officer or a director in the company, but you still have a duty of loyalty to the university. And so direct competition with your employer during employment, that could be implicated when you're also part of the company. Could you click ahead, Beth?
Sorry, I'm trying to answer the chats and do the, so no, that's perfect. Just shake me out of it.
Sure. And as university personnel, you need to comply with university policies. And so where your duties to the company and the duties to the university can't align, that's where you have an unmanaged or unmanageable conflict. The way to get rid of the conflict or manage the conflict is you can make a choice, either step down from your fiduciary role in the company. So say you start a company, you're the founder, you serve as CEO initially, step down in that role, have higher professional management, or say you want to take the company, be on the company side of things, you have a choice. You can leave the university, take a leave of absence. So a more specific example, you have a startup that you're part of, you founded, the startup receives an STTR award. This is for small businesses where the small business partners with a research institution. You hire a chief technology officer who's not you for the company. That person, you have them serve as the PI for the STTR on behalf of the company. And then the company contracts with a university collaborator. The company issues a subcontract, but that collaborator is at Johns Hopkins, as an example, not the University of Maryland. This is a research scenario that is manageable. Where in a similar scenario where a company that you owned, a startup company, receives an STTR award, but you are the PI yourself on the company side, and then you want to issue a subaward to the university to have your own lab do the work, that is an unmanaged conflict and would be very difficult to manage. And how the committee would recommend, depending on the specific facts of what you want done, is picking a side, having somebody either work on the company side, or even better, have somebody who's not you on the university side do the work for the university. Interactions with companies. So I know this comes across as a little negative, things you can't do when you're both university personnel and part of an outside company, but want to offer alternatives and ways to mitigate where the conflict is. So if you want to be PI on both sides of the table, you want to be PI on the company side and PI on the university side, that's really difficult to make happen since remember, the prohibition to self-dealing. Instead, pick a side for individual projects. Another problematic area is what we talked about, having your advisees or lab personnel work in your company, where they report to you at the university and report to you at the company. Instead, if it's possible, have separate reporting lines. So if your company is collaborating with the university, have people work on the project who don't report to you, have them report to somebody else. Having students in your classes work at your company, that's a no-no as well. Instead, hire the students when they're no longer your students. Having lab members go in company space and vice versa, even if your company has a facilities use license, that's a no-no as well. Instead, have a barrier, keep space, people, and project tasks separate. It's fine to have joint meetings where that makes sense given the scope of the project, but where things can be separated as much as possible makes things most manageable. Giving the university gifts, internships to benefit your own research. Instead, fund research through the proper channels. And I think I remember seeing a question about gifts in the chat. Did you answer that already, Beth?
So there are several questions about gifts. So whether they need to be disclosed, all research gifts need to be disclosed with the conflict of interest through KCOI, even if they go through university relations. In fact, we just received an email last week, at the end of last week, from the VPR and the Associate Vice President for University Relations stating that all research gifts must be disclosed and go through Conflict of Interest Committee. There will be a new process that comes online starting July 1st, but that email went out. If you haven't received that email, you can contact COI. I can forward you the email. But yes, all of them do have to be disclosed. There was also a question as to whether consulting relationships is one disclosure and gifts from a foundation is another disclosure. You have a single disclosure now. There's one compiled disclosure. So if you say yes to you receive gifts, and if you say yes to you have a consulting relationship, you would just add entity information for your consulting information and then entity information for the gift. And if you go on, the gift can be confusing to many as they're looking at the KCOI form. We actually have a FAQ on that gives you a screenshot of the questions you'll be asked about the gift in the entity information with the potential answers. So I hope that that's helpful.
And we have a hand raised. Don Milton, you have a question?
Yeah, well, it's following up on that because when I've tried to fill out the relationship, I don't have a relationship with the entity, the foundation that gave the gift. And there's no place to say that. It requires that I have some relationship.
So Don, that's something we can talk about offline. If you go and you look at the FAQ, it tells you what to put as far as that information, I believe in the
I'm looking at it. I don't see the answer, but we can talk offline.
Next slide, Beth.
Actually, if we want to answer that very quickly, here is the FAQ for the gift, and it says relationship type. It says gift and relationship, paid or unpaid. This is in the entity information. But again, if you have additional questions, we can talk about that offline.
Interactions with companies, things you can do, and this is not a comprehensive list, but when you are both university personnel and part of the outside company, so from the university side, disclose the relationship, you can and should do that. If you're planning to form a startup company, you can absolutely be the PI on, say, TEDCO's MII Tech Assessment Project. This is our proof of concept funding program. So even if you're just at the early stages, starting to think about forming a company, we have also I-Corps on campus too, which is a great way to participate and see if the idea you have, if the value proposition makes sense or if you need to pivot. You can certainly create university IP, which then gets licensed to that outside company. The policies do have some mitigation steps for when you're part of the company, but then may also be entitled to revenue under the university's IP policy. That's can be either mitigated through our office or by waiving rights to certain. Yes.
I was going to say there's a question related exactly to that. It says a researcher has a startup company in the university. Can the company get access to the researcher experimental data?
Yeah, and that would be through a license, which goes through my office, UM Ventures. From the company side, things you can do, things you should do, hire professional management. In my mind, that's often the best way of helping you keep your university and company interests separate, that you have other people making decisions for the company, and that helps reduce your conflict. The company certainly can apply for SBIR, STTR, or any other funding. The company can seek investment, which they would certainly want to do. The company can obtain physical space separate from your university lab. What we didn't talk about much is the facilities use application process. We can talk about that at the end if there's time. Keeping space separate, in my mind too, is also a great way to keep things managed. And then if the company that you have a relationship with is a startup, the company is eligible for TEDCO's MII company formation funding. And of course, more things to do. But keep in mind too, we're talking about what you can do. You personally are not your company. One of the great benefits to forming a company, forming a corporation, forming an LLC, is that this is a separate entity, separate from you individually, keeps you free from liabilities of the company. So a lot of ways to go about doing that. And UM Ventures, we have entrepreneurs and residents available for specific questions like that, best way to form a company and getting company advice. Note, if you have a company which does license university IP on which you're named as an inventor, you cannot negotiate the license against the university. And the current interim COI policy talks about prohibitions then on basically double dipping, receiving money revenue from the university through that license, if you're also getting it through the company. And if you have specific questions on that, I'm happy to answer those. There's also the consulting policy in the works that I mentioned too, and this will help close some holes based on recent federal guidelines. Another case study, which hopefully at this point you can walk through this with me and help issue spot. Next slide, Beth. So our fictional researcher, Dr. Linda Page, she recently disclosed a new IP that she made at the university, generated from her research on cybersecurity. She's decided to use this IP as the basis for her new startup company called Acme Co. to further develop the IP and bring it to market. Acme Co. is proposing, say, an SBIR or STTR award. They want to subcontract part of the work to the university. The proposal that Dr. Page submits, she's the PI on the subaward, so she's the PI on the university side. Dr. Page, though, is also the authorized signatory on behalf of Acme Company on the subaward. The budget that she submits includes students and staff that work under her supervision. And the work will be performed in her new well-funded high-tech lab on campus. In addition, Acme Co. doesn't yet have a license to the university IP. Hopefully for you, you're able to see where some of the red flags are, that on its face, this might sound great. She wants to form a company, further develop the IP, bring it to market, is getting funding, but where there's some problems. So subcontracting to the university, that is potentially okay, but where Dr. Page is the PI on the subaward on the university side, but then also would sign on behalf of Acme, that's where there's a problem. One way of mitigating that is finding another PI on the company side. Budget, including students and staff at the university that work under her supervision, that's problematic. For the award, if this sub goes through, they may need to report to somebody else at the university. And that the work would be performed in her lab on campus. Well, is it the work on the company side? Is it the work on the university side? That would need some clarity. If it's a task that the company should be doing, they would need an approved facilities use license. And I'd be curious, what's the difference between what's the company doing and what's the university doing? As many separations as can be set up as possible makes this more manageable. Something like this, then, if it came to the IP committee, this might rise to the level of having a conflicts of interest oversight committee that might manage financials, might help manage students, and other things happening under the project. And separate from COI, but if the company needs access to university IP in order to carry out the project, they'd need a license from the university to do so. And that's through my office. Any other questions we should get to before we move on?
So there's one, Pat, I don't know if you want to answer this one. It says on the COI form that the question is, do you or your family members serve as an officer with fiduciary responsibilities in a professional society that has decision-making power in areas related to your UMD responsibilities? So
yeah, I mean, that's unlikely to create a problem, but it could. In areas, for example, if the professional society was involved in certification of qualifications or something like that, that are related to your university activities or people in your department, there could be a potential there for a conflict. But it's not something we see very often in reporting. But it's just asked for completeness. And I can't recall any specific case that we've had to deal with in regard to that.
I can't either. There's also someone's posting about an FAQ they found about faculty involvement, about engaging students outside one's class. Question says, may I engage students in my outside consulting, business, or professional? And the answer given was yes, but only under appropriate conditions because it may involve the COI or COC. Such involvement should be disclosed and approved in advance. So the key issues are that there's no pressure, that there's no judgment, outside activities. So this is great. I would appreciate if you could send the link, Dr. McCauley, where you found this FAQ, because things have changed a lot and we're finding that there are potential holes in either policies or guidelines or procedures that may be on the website in different places. And as we have evolved as a committee, I think our thinking on how we protect students and the types of mitigation plans and the types of things that we recommend has changed. So this may be something that we need to follow through and update.
Dr. McCauley,
Thanks.
so you have your hand raised. Does that answer?
Yeah, no, this was the question that you just addressed. I downloaded it off the website, somewhere on the website within the last year, I believe, and I see it's now changed. But I'm curious, is there, it does seem like I really like that FAQ because it did give students those opportunities that you mentioned to get outside experience. And it seems like now it sounds like it's a blanket no. And I'm curious what the process was for doing that, and whether it's
but it does state outside of your group,
outside of your lab. Yeah, the FAQ
or outside your class.
Yeah, the students in your class, it said no to.
Right.
But
So we're not saying you can't engage with students who aren't in your class, and we're not saying that you can't engage with students who aren't in your research group. You can do that. That is not a conflict. What we're saying is you can't engage with students in your class when they're in your class, and you can't engage the people in your lab in your outside activities. Does that make it clear? So yes, that you can engage with those who are not in your classes and who are not in your research group.
Okay, okay, it looks a little ambiguous on the current FAQ on the website because it says no personnel employed by UMD will be employed part-time or full-time by the company, including undergraduate students. But doesn't that first, at the very end, it does have some language about cannot be students in classes, but it seems a little vague on the FAQ on the website now.
So when are you referring to the COI website when you're saying the website?
Yeah,
Okay,
well, I'm on research.umd.edu. I'll send the link in the chat.
That would be awesome. if you'd send the link. Thank you.
There it is.
All right, thank you. We'll look
Yep.
into that.
Thank you.
There's another hand raised from Pino Martin.
Hi, this is very useful. Thank you. A refresher for me. It is still, Beth, a little bit ambiguous on hiring classes, hiring students, not in your classes, but from your lab. In one of the slides from Felicia, it says, have students in your classes work in your company instead. Do that when they're not in your classes, okay? And then there is another one. Have your advisees or lab personnel work in your company. Instead, separate concurrent reporting lines. So you can still.
So if you look at the top of the slide, it says what you can't do. The first bullets are what you can't do, and the second bullet where it says instead, that's what we're suggesting you do instead.
Beth, I get that, but still, right? Exactly. So you can still have students in your lab. They just need to report to someone else.
No, probably not. I don't. So every situation is different.
Yeah.
But in general, right now, the committee is not recommending at any time that students be allowed to work in their advisors' companies.
Yeah, so that's what I got initially during this presentation of yours, but then this slide makes it kind of ambiguous again. So I take your last communication that is
so let me state that it also depends on how large your company is, what your role in the company is. If you have a CEO and your company is so large that you've now stepped back from being CEO of your company, and your engagement with the company is at a minimal level. At that point, if a student in your lab was coming in and you are really not engaged with the company, then that's a possibility. And that would be something the committee may consider. But again, a lot of these situations are very nuanced, which is why we suggest that you reach out to us to describe your particular situation. But if you're a very small startup where you're the CEO, then the answer is going to be no, because there is no ability to separate you and the student in that situation.
That's very, very useful. Thank you. But I thought being a CEO at a company is a conflict of interest of the major kind, which you should never have.
We have a carve out for research when you're first starting up. Then when your company is small, you can be the CEO.
Thank you.
It would be part of your management plan that would be reviewed annually, and it could change the next time that you submit. But again, these situations are very nuanced. But if you're just starting, if you are starting the startup, you have to be the president because you may be the only person in the company.
I understand.
But as it grows, as a company grows, which we hope that you do, and then you would have to step out of fiduciary roles.
And we do recommend, as Felicia said, that bring in professional outside help as CEOs and financial managers is a good idea as soon as possible.
There was also a question in the chat or in the Q&A that I answered, but wanted to bring it up too. So my examples with getting an STTR saying you can't be PI on the university side, you potentially could be where you have equity in a company, the company is sub-awarding, giving a subcontract to the university. You could potentially be the PI on the university side if you've disclosed the relationship, you've disclosed, the proposal's gone through Aura, and the COI committee will look at specifics of the project, and so there might be conflicts of interest oversight official. There might even be an oversight committee if it's especially complex. If you're the PI on the university side, though, you would need to have somebody else be the PI on the company side. You may also have questions about, effort levels, how you're getting paid, things like that. So it's not a blanket no that you couldn't be the PI. The examples I gave are just a little bit cleaner where you're not the PI.
So we have a question about what the process is for disclosure review. If we don't have any, are there other things in the chat that we need to address before we move on?
I don't think so, though. Dr. McCauley, you have your hand raised again.
Sorry, I never lowered it. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay. So we're about to discuss what happens. Again, just to go in a little more depth of what did we do as far as a committee. Felicia, was there another question?
In the Q&A, just what's the process for disclosure review? I filled the form. What happens next?
Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about now. So you've discussed what you want to do with your chair and your dean, if necessary, the director of your unit. You've disclosed. So the question, as was raised, is what happens next? So what we do as a committee is our job is to read through the disclosures and discuss, to talk about how can we manage it? What have we done in the past? What's the precedent that's been set? Are there federal changes or policy changes at the university or federally that we need to take into consideration as we think about what recommendation we would put forward? So in that, we are, as a group, there are 9 voting members on the group. We range from administrators. So Felicia sits on the group for UM Ventures. Wendy Montgomery sits on the group for Office of Research Administration. And then we have faculty members on the group that have been in the situations. They either have startups or they consult. And so they understand where we're coming from when we're thinking about this entrepreneurial partnership that we have. And so we basically talk about what is disclosed. We think about IP licensing. We talk about what awards are either pending or awarded. We think about whether someone is trying to do a startup and they want to have space at the university. And then have they applied for facilities use application? Have they gone through the intake process? All of those things go into how we decide whether there is a conflict, and if there is, what can we recommend as far as a management plan? So the first thing that happens is you disclose in KCOI. Once you hit submit, it routes automatically to your chair and then to your dean. We're asking the chair and dean to review the information that's provided and that they are looking at it in the best of their knowledge. They have that you have disclosed everything that they're aware of and that they have no questions. We have the ability in KCY to comment, and we can return it back to the reporter, you, the discloser, to ask for more information at that level. After the dean and the chair have reviewed, however, it comes to us in the COI office. I will say, if you have disclosed and you're waiting for a disposition, we have had almost 400 disclosures since November. We are backlogged. Of those, about 140-ish were auto-approved. That means the disclosure went in and they answered no to every single question. They don't consult. They don't have gifts. They aren't on a board. They answered no to all the other checklists. That's when they're auto-approved. About 140 were auto-approved. That means somebody, Pat and I right now, have to put eyes on over 260 disclosures. So we're backlogged. So we ask that you bear with us as we work through the backlog. We are getting additional help in the office within the next month. But if you have something that's waiting, like an FUA application or an award, please contact COI and ask where you are in the queue, and we can try to move you up as we need to.
So those auto-approve ones don't get reviewed by the committee?
Correct, they do not. So if you get auto approved, you will know instantly whether you're auto approved, because as soon as you hit submit, it's gonna, if everything is no, it's gonna auto approve you then. And you can look in your own disclosure and see the date and time that it was auto approved. So your disposition will show up. We do have somebody in the office that looks at all of those to ensure that all the answers were no. We've had cases where, because it is a new system, that something slipped through the cracks. So somebody eventually does put eyes on those, but no, they do not go to the committee. When it comes into the office, we also look to make sure that we are answering, that when we review the disclosure, that all the questions that we think the committee might ask are, that we make sure we get the information. So we might have an iterative process with you where we add comments, we send it back, ask you to provide additional information. There are times when Pat and I are looking at these that we can, based on the information provided, say that there isn't a conflict of interest. If you are consulting and it has nothing to do with the university at this point, then we may consider that not a conflict of interest. If you have a gift that is for your research and you have no other relationship with the donor, that may not be a conflict of interest. We have the ability to administratively look at those and make a disposition. If it does need to go to the committee meets monthly. It's just like IRB, which is human subjects, or IACUC, which is animals. There's a monthly meeting where protocols are reviewed for them and where disclosures are reviewed for us. It's a 2-hour meeting. At best, we can get through 6 to 8 disclosures in a meeting. So we try to only bring the disclosures that really need the committee to discuss. And so we looked, if there is a conflict and if the committee agrees there is a conflict, what we try to do is either eliminate the conflict, which we talked about in the case studies, where if you are a consultant and then you're going to have an award with that company or wherever, you'd have to give one up. Or your postdoc cannot work in your company, so your postdoc has to choose which side they're going to be on. That would be eliminating the conflict of interest. If we can't eliminate it, then we try to help you create a management plan. So management plans take 2 forms right now. There are oversight official plans, and then there are oversight committee plans. For the oversight official, these are cases in which there may be spouses or people in a familial relationship working together where they're either co-investigators or PIs together on awards. We have a plan for that. It could be that you have a small startup and you have an STTR, or you're working in a prime sub relationship with your company, where somebody on the company side is PI and you're the PI on the UMD side. In these cases, we typically have an oversight official. In the case of familial relationships, it's the chair of your department. In the case of company or research-oriented conflicts that need an oversight official, it's usually somebody who has an understanding of what you're doing with your research. So then their job is to meet with you, meet with the chair of the COI committee, meet with the administrators in your department to talk about what the plan is about, what the expectations are. They also meet with the students and employees that are going to be on the project independently of you to talk about the management plan and to let them know who they can talk to if they have any issues. They sign off on monthly accounting of spending on the affected awards. Again, these plans are meant to create separation so that we can control or manage the conflict. So somebody else signing off in this monthly accounting. We meet with the researchers. The oversight official meets with the research once a month to go over your research annual reports. So they're looking at the data with you, talking about what you've done. Again, this is all about integrity in the research. This is why we do what we do. And then they submit a report to the Conflict of Interest Committee. So this is our post-approval monitoring aspect of creating these plans. In cases like for the MIPS grant, this is just an example of what we would add to an oversight official management plan, is that, again, your current advisees, which we've talked a lot about today, they can't be in the company, your people in your classes can't be, and that you may need a facilities use license and that you need to work with UM Ventures. So this is a typical oversight official management plan.
There's a questions in the Q&A about if you have equity in a company, can you also then receive sponsored research funding from that same company to your lab? And I think the MIPS award is a good example of that, where a MIPS project, for those unfamiliar with it, say you're a small company, the company puts up $10,000 for a project, the state does another $90,000 about, and this could fund research in your lab where the company is a company in which you have equity in. But again, it needs to be disclosed, managed appropriately. We need clarity. We need to understand the facts, who's the PI, what are reporting lines, things like that. So I think fact-specific answers to the question about if I have equity in a company, can I also receive sponsored research funding? I think it depends on the situation.
Mhm.
And also, Beth and Pat, we have about 10 minutes left.
So I can go through this. Next one is oversight of an oversight committee. Oversight committees, we only have a handful of these on campus. These are for researchers on campus, disclosures on campus who have potentially either a very well-funded company, which they're doing research with the university and may have multiple awards, or they may have multiple companies with multiple awards. In that case, we step up the oversight. Instead of an annual meeting, there is a biannual meeting, and there is an actual committee that is appointed by the Vice President for Research that includes members from UM Ventures, members from Export Control, members from the department, an oversight official, and then other appointees as the VPR sees fit. Every 6 months, they are then reviewing financial transactions between the university and the company to ensure that it meets the requirements of the awards that are out there. Different agencies have different requirements when it comes to COI. They look at all the purchases, all of these that must be approved by the department, and the researcher cannot sign subaward request forms. So again, we're just creating the distance between the two. But basically, the oversight committee is doing more in-depth look at what's going on between the company and the university and ensuring, again, the integrity of the research. It all comes back to that. But the oversight committees are much more intense, they pull more records, they look at effort reporting, there's matching of all of this information. And so it's much more in depth. Okay. Pat, I think this then goes to you to talk about some of the gifts that we've been discussing.
Yeah, and then we need to leave time for some more questions. I'm going to be quick on this because we're running out of time. But gifts can give rise to a COI if there's a non-disclosed relationship or agreement between the donor and the recipient, and that's why we have the new system coming online, where all research-related gifts have to be approved, and there has to be a KCOI statement. And again, just an example of a case study is that a gift has arrived from the Empirical Widget Foundation to support Professor Proton's lab, where Professor Proton is studying the effectiveness of widgets manufactured by Imperial Widget Corporation. What are the questions here? Well, is the Empirical Widget Foundation connected to Imperial Widget Corporation? That's what we're trying to tease out in these processes. Are there some non-obvious connections between the donor or funder of research or so forth, so that we can avoid potential conflict of interest? And because if there's an undisclosed relationship, things can blow up, as they did several years ago in regard to some research where well-meaning people didn't fully understand the conflict of interest related to gifts, and we had to deal with that several years ago. Also, procurement. Skip through 2 slides. Procurement equally relates to purchasing, either an outside entity buying from the university or an outside entity selling to the university. In other words, money can flow one way or the other. Again, an example is that Professor Proton is on the board of directors of Imperial Widget Corporation, but also he's the director of the Widget Research Laboratory and recommends that the university purchase widgets from the Imperial Widget Corporation to support the research. What should happen? That certainly sounds like a conflict of interest. Oh, we're back up. That potentially sounds like a conflict of interest, but if it's a situation where the widgets are absolutely necessary for the research and there's no other source, a workaround might be possible. Certainly, this is something that would have to be discussed with and managed by the Conflict of Interest Committee. And again, an example of something like this occurred up in Baltimore a couple of years ago, where board members on the university hospital system got into trouble because of self-dealing in regard to procurement. So I guess that's it, guys. The last slide is just some resources. Basically, these are all on our COI website that you can easily access. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left. So I guess there's a question from an anonymous attendee, which says, am I supposed to continue external consulting activities until I receive feedback on the disclosure? And the type of consulting activities described here look like they're non-conflicting. So the answer is no, you don't have to discontinue. You can continue unless something comes up where you're specifically told to stop. Okay.
But don't we have to talk to our chair before we take on any consulting?
Yeah.
It's a potential conflict of commitment as well.
Right.
And so there has to be a discussion, whether it's, your chair and the COI committee or your chair. So.
But generally, if your chair has said it's okay, you can continue until you hear otherwise from the committee. And in most cases, there isn't a problem. So.
Ala, do you know if you missed any chat questions?
No, I think that we covered. I think you covered lots of ground today, lots of information. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who was asking questions. They were fantastic and contributed to the conversation. I will download the Q&A and chat file and send it to Beth so that those questions could possibly be also incorporated in the Q&A site, so that others could have access to those. And again, we will post this video on our Startup UMD YouTube channel. You will receive a link, and also you'll receive a link to a document, or I already posted the link to the COI website a few times, so you can visit that site and look for a lot of information. And please email coi@umd.edu with any questions.
There's a couple more questions. Happy to stay and answer. There's one, should administrative staff also report possible COI even if we don't do research? The policies apply to staff as well as faculty. Though if you disclose something where the COI office might look at it and think potentially it might not involve strict research, but might involve doing other business with the university, they'll guide you appropriately. Potentially, you'd need to go directly to the State Ethics Commission if it's something that involves doing the same sort of functions outside the university as you do for the university. But again, fact specific. But yes, the policy applies to staff as well as faculty. Another question, do you have conflicts between chairs who don't support this, even though the outside activity is supported by the policy? Yes, probably.
We haven't encountered that. I mean, but we have to distinguish between conflict of commitment and conflict of interest. Right, conflict of commitment is managed at the chair director level. We don't deal with that at the university level. And in terms of the conflict of interest, once a disclosure is made, it will get routed to us, even if the chair says something negative about it. We will get to see it. The chair is not an approver or a disapprover. They can comment, and then it will be passed on to the office and the committee for further discussion. But we haven't encountered a situation like that, as far as I'm aware.
Yep, thank you. And
all
so
right.
Just quickly summarize, if you think you may have a potential conflict, it's not a bad thing. In fact, when it comes to startup formation, university loves those types of conflicts. Just be sure that, or potential conflicts, just be sure that you disclose that via the KCOI system. It's an electronic system, and keep it updated, because a lot of times, oh yeah, we have a great poll. So if you could answer that real quick, that would be a great indication of how today's session went. So again, if you have questions, send an email. And if you have a potential or perceived conflict of interest, it's better to disclose it and have it managed. It's not just for the university, it's also for you, for your own protection, so that if anybody raises any questions, you can have that conflict already reviewed, resolved, and managed if need be.
So our poll question, the COI policy applies to me. If you are employed by the University of Maryland, it does apply to you. Whether or not you have a policy or have a conflict, the policy does apply to all of us who work at the university.
So thank you so much. Thank you, Pat, Beth, and Felicia. This has been very informative, and we probably should repeat this session in a year or so in case there are any updates. In the meantime, any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to share the results of the poll real quick. All right, well, thank you so much.
And if you do, there's one more question. If you witness or suspect a potential COI, should you report it, even if it's not about you? I'd say yes. The COI at umd.edu email address, it's a good place to start. You can go to Beth or Pat directly.
And if it's something larger than that, there's the whistleblower hotline.
Yep. Again, thank you so much, and I'm would like to wish everybody a great rest of this very rainy day. Thank you.
Thank you.